And we are back on the phone with me out of New York City, where it's a beautiful fall day, as it's a beautiful day here in sunny California. On the phone with me is Morrow Wilson. This is his second novel. It's called David Sunshine, a novel of the communications industry, talking about, he says it's fictional. It's kind of based on his a part of his life with television talk show pioneer David Susskind, and his work as an associate producer on the show. They didn't call them producers. You got the associate producer, but you were doing everything that a producer was doing. I want to ask you this, Morrow, because in the book, your character, TJ in the book, and David Sunshine is kind of like David Susskind's character. How come for the most part, especially in the beginning of the book, you use his whole name? Every time you talk about him, it's David Sunshine. It's not just David, it's David Sunshine. What made you use his whole name?
That's a good question. I think that there's a thing that we all have a tendency to do with celebrities, and that is we won't say somebody says who's your favorite actor. I asked him the day, and she says Duvall. Well, we don't normally do that. I mean, we would say Robert Duvall.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we're all actors and stuff, but that sounds more like, I don't know, a corporation or something, doesn't it? So that's one thing. And there's another reason too, which is that the novel is told by a storyteller. He's the third person narrator, but he's a kind of old-fashioned Southern storyteller who says at the beginning of the book, gather around and settle down, and this book's going to tell you a story about a hero. And he talks that way. So you get that Southern thing, which, by the way, is something that my late wife captured in Blanche Devereaux, where she wouldn't say even on the show, Blanche Devereaux would never say, "Well, we're expecting a visit from Burt Reynolds." She would say, "We're expecting a visit from Mr. Burt Reynolds."
Mr. Burt Reynolds.
Mr. Burt Reynolds. So there was always that. And remember the 60s now. This is the early 60s. We were a lot more, I don't know, some people say repressed, some people say civil.
Okay, let's go with all of those. We had a lot more repressed civility, and maybe we could use some of that now, because now it's just like, let everything hang out, everything goes, it doesn't matter, and the kids will say, don't judge me. Oh, sweetie, I want to know why you thought it was a good idea to put tattoos in your face. That's what I want to know, and I want to know what made you think it was a good idea to walk outside in your pajama bottoms or walk outside with your pants hanging down. I don't need to see your tramp stamp. I just don't. When I found out what that was, more, I was just like outdone. And this is when I was reading it, I was like, he mentions David Sunshine, because when you call my whole name, I think I'm in trouble. When you're a kid and you grow up, especially back east, and they call your entire name, and he's like, you are in such trouble. And I was like, David Sunshine is in trouble through this whole book. And TJ, now I wanted to ask you, because TJ's character is loosely based on you. David Sunshine is loosely based on your boss. Are some of the other characters in here based on people that you've changed the names and the circumstances to protect the innocent or the guilty? Because they seem so very realistic.
That's right. Well, they sure were. I mean, there's the president of CBS is chronicled in all his glory. He was a pretty tough. Pretty tough character, and there's some other people, all of whom I think that's why the publishers decided to back out on this thing back in the 60s, when it would have been a lovely expose. It would have been great. It would have been a lot of fun. And
it's too raw.
Almost everybody in it is recognizable.
Morrow is too raw. It was too raw for the 60s. I mean, when you think about it, and the way that you've ripped the lid off of what kind of really goes on behind closed doors back then, it's probably because you've seen on the other side of the camera. I mean, you've done so many plays. You've worked with so many different kinds of people. You've been writing since you started writing when you were like 12 or 13 years old.
Got my first rejection slip from the Saturday Evening Post when I was 14.
Okay, but tell them the flip side of that part. I mean, the fact that you even got a rejection letter from them when you were 14 years old, there are grown people who were like, what? They don't want my stuff? And they're going, at 14, what does he know? That's probably why they rejected you. Did they ever tell you?
I didn't tell them I was 14. But yeah, but I got, the first time I got paid for writing, I was 17.
Did you always want to be a writer?
Yeah, well, see, my dad was a writer, and it's not a famous name today, but he was quite successful. His name was Charles Morrow Wilson, and he got the Charles, and I'm junior, you see, so he got the Charlie, and I got the Morrow, and I think if your last name is Wilson, it's good to have something unusual for a first name. Wilson's pretty common name. So I got a brother named Jim and a brother named Joe and a father named Charlie. Jim Wilson, Charlie Wilson. Come on. So anyway, Morrow Wilson is gives me a little bit of a. Well, if you have two last names, you sound like a writer.
You sound like my husband. When I first took him home to meet my family, they asked him what was his name. He told them. They said, well, what's your first name? He told them. He said, what kind of name is that? They gave you the same name for your first and last name. He goes, no, you got two last names. It's like, oh my God,
well, that's right.
You just can't work with them.
The old days, the board circuit comedians used to have two first names. Remember Jackie Leonard, Jenny Bruce,
Jack Benny. Jack Benny, Lenny Bruce. You now it's so different. Now you're not anybody unless you're called by one name. They don't call you by your whole name anymore. It used to be Beyoncé Knowles. Now it's just Beyonce. Used to be
right.
People I bet you don't even know what Madonna's last name is anymore, and you just have one name.
That's right. Oh, well, that of course was a great goal. Some people did achieve that much earlier. Dagmar and Liberace and there were Hildegard. There were a few people like that, but generally speaking, that's absolutely right. They were the exceptions.
Let's talk about your illustrious stage career. What made you? I mean, you working, you're fresh out of college, you're working for, a big time television personality. What made you decide to go on stage and have such a prolific career being on stage and writing at the same time? I'm like, you're like the everything man. I mean, when you look at your resume, you're like part Jamaican. You have like 15 jobs.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I had always expected to be a writer, I mean, in third grade, I expected, I'd make my living as a writer, but I never thought I would be an actor. I got into it very late. I was 30 years old before I set out to. And the only reason I did that was I had been writing for an ad agency, and I got kind of fed up with that, and I'd been there 4 years, and I just quit one day. Something happened, some little thing I don't even remember, but it had been building. And so
I was going to say, usually you don't just get up and walk off a job. You're like, okay, that's it. That's enough of this. I got to move on. Yeah.
4 years, I could have got a diploma if I just stuck around. Anyway, so I thought to myself, well, I've been reading commercials to my bosses all these years. Why don't I read them to a microphone, and maybe I can make some money as a voiceover announcer? Mm-hmm. And so I got started. I made a tape, and this is what I mean when I say the early '60s were a very different time. I mean, it was not nearly so exclusionary for everybody. I mean, when you look at even the struggle for civil rights, great people like Martin Luther King thought we can right these wrongs now. It was something about that era. We all thought that we were all much more open. We thought things would happen, and now
And we thought we could make them better if we all pooled our resources together.
That's right.
And I've oftentimes, especially talking to people of color, and I grew up in this. I'm a baby boomer, and I grew up in that era. I mean, I remember watching them, water hose, young people. I watched them throw food in their faces and spit on them. We were watching the stories, and the news. It wasn't instant like it is now. We had to to wait until we heard from Walter Cronkite, or wait till we heard from Chet Huntley and David Brent. Date yourself, Mother Love. Just tell them how long you've been on the planet that you can remember all of these people. But I remember growing up with them. I remember there were only 3 television stations. We didn't have PBS. We didn't have cable. You had one TV in the house. It was black and white, and your parents controlled controlled the knob. It wasn't even remote control. You actually had to get up and walk across the room and change the channel to the TV. Now we got so lazy. Look, we don't even flush our own toilet and wash our own hands. We are just so flippin' lazy. And because you've come up through that, and you've been on stage, and you've won numerous awards, and congratulations for all that. You've done so many things, and you've seen so much. What goes through your head as a writer, as a creative person, when you see the way that things have changed and shifted? The dynamic has shifted in such a dramatic, to me, a negative way, when we're not so tolerant. I mean, back then, even though racism had reared its ugly head, it was blatant, and we wanted to do something about it. Now it's like so covert, and so it's really not that subtle.
I agree with that, and it almost seems that we've wasted that so much. I was walking along 3rd Avenue the other day, and there were some construction guys, hard hat, walking along, and they were trying to. It was lunch hour, and they wanted to know. They're talking amongst themselves about where shall we go to lunch, and there was a rib joint on 3rd Avenue called Smoky Joe's, and they're walking, and one of them says, these are very, these are white men, and one of them says, well, why don't we go in there? And the other one says, yeah, that looks good, and he said, no, I'm joking, that's a black joint. And
like ribs are just for black people.
like ribs are only for black, but and I thought, oh man,
in the are you thinking in the 21st century they're still talking like this? That their minds are so closed.
We replaced, the N-word with black. I mean, is that really all? Well, of course, we've made a great deal more progress in that, but I think to really to go at the heart of what I think is the difference between 40 years ago and now, as far as this. What happened to us is that the 60s, which everyone talks about as a decade of love, turned out to be, had a really ugly side to it. I mean, we lost 3 of our greatest political leaders for assassins' bullets. We saw most of our cities in flames with race riots by the time it was over. And it wasn't all, Woodstock and rock and roll and free love. I mean, there was an unwinnable war that we were in, and our administration knew that they couldn't win the war, but they kept it up anyway. And so it was, and Americans became afraid in a way that was unimaginable. This is way before 9/11. Now,
right.
Of course, you expect security guards everywhere and all that. But in those days, I remember I used to be able, between appointments, say downtown when I was going around in Midtown, New York, I might go over to NBC to use the restroom.
And it was no big deal.
To the very same floor that the Johnny Carson show was on, and I'd go to the men's room and I'd come out, and I mean, I didn't work for NBC, and I just was going in and out, and that was fine. Well, I tell you, if I wanted to go, Jack Paar, speaking of old time television guys, Jack Paar came back to NBC at one point to do a special, and they wouldn't let him in.
They wouldn't let him into NBC?
What's that?
They wouldn't let him into NBC. This is the guy that
right.
started the Tonight Show.
He gets to the security desk and they say, well, where you're, somebody younger who didn't
know any better.
And he said, we can't let you on those elevators without. And Paar said, kid, I paid for those elevators, which kind of is one of the few times.
What do they say? You better know who you're dealing with.